Hello, and welcome to my channel, Reading Little Blue Books Out Loud. This, right here, is a little blue book. It just happens to be Little Blue Book number 700, and it is titled A Guide to Schopenhauer, written by Will Durant, PhD. Copyright 1924. This is part 2, and we left off at the bottom of page 20. Top of page 21 is chapter 3, The World as Idea. Pardon me. Ooh, I feel another one. And another one. Okay, here we go. What strikes the reader at once upon opening The World as Will and Idea is its style. Here is no Chinese puzzle of Kantian terminology, no Hegelian obfuscation, no Spinozist geometry. Everything here is clarity and order, and all is admirably centered about the leading conception of the world as will, and therefore strife, and therefore misery. What blunt honesty, what refreshing vigor, what uncompromising directness! Where his predecessors are abstract to the point of invisibility, with theories that give out few windows of illustration upon the actual world, Schopenhauer, like the son of a businessman, is rich in the concrete, in examples and applications, even in humor. After Kant, humor in philosophy was a startling innovation. But why was his book rejected? Partly because it attacked just those who could have given it publicity, the university teachers. I'm sorry, let's read that again. Because it attacked those who could have given it publicity, the university teachers. Hegel was philosophic director of Germany in 1818, yet Schopenhauer loses no time in assailing him. In the preface of the second edition he writes, "No time can be more unfavorable to philosophy than that in which it is shamefully misused on the one hand to further political objects, on the other as a means of livelihood. Is there then nothing to oppose to the maxim, Primum verve denidi philosopheri? These gentlemen desire to live, and indeed to live by philosophy. To philosophy they are assigned, with their wives and children. The role, I sing the song of him whose bread I eat, has always held good. The making of money by philosophy was regarded by the ancients as the characteristic of the sophists. Nothing is to be had for gold but mediocrity. It is impossible that an age which for 20 years has applauded a Hegel, that intellectual Caliban, as the greatest of the philosophers, could make him who has looked on at that desirous of its approbation, but rather truth will always be paucorum hominium, and must therefore quietly and modestly wait for the few whose unusual mode of thought may find it enjoyable. Life is short, but truth works far and lives long. Let us speak the truth." These last words are nobly spoken, but there is something of sour grapes in it all. No man was ever more anxious for approbation than Schopenhauer. It would have been nobler still to say nothing ill of Hegel. De inimicis nil nisi bonum. Of our enemies let us say nothing but good. And as for modesty awaiting recognition, I cannot see, says Schopenhauer, that between Kant and myself anything has been done in philosophy. I hold this thought, that the world is will, to be that which has long been sought for under the name of philosophy, and the discovery of which is therefore regarded by those who are familiar with history as quite as impossible as the discovery of the philosopher's stone. I only intend to impart a single thought, yet notwithstanding all my endeavors, I could find no shorter way of imparting it than this whole book. Read the book twice, and the first time with great patience. So much for modesty. What is modesty but hypocritical humility, by means of which, in a world swelling with envy, a man seeks to obtain pardon for excellences and merits from those who have none? No doubt when modesty was made a virtue, it was a very advantageous thing for the fools, for everybody is expected to speak of himself as if he were one. There was no humility about the first sentence in Schopenhauer's book. The world, it begins, is my idea. When Fichte had uttered a similar proposition, even the metaphysically sophisticated Germans had asked, "What does his wife say about this?" But Schopenhauer had no wife. His meaning, of course, was simple enough. He wished to accept, at the onset, the Kantian position that the external world is known to us only through our sensations and ideas. There follows an exposition of idealism, which is clear and forceful enough, but which constitutes the least original part of the book, and might better have come last than first. The world took a generation to discover Schopenhauer, because he hid his own thought behind a 200-page barrier of second-hand idealism. The most vital part of the first section is an attack on materialism. How can we explain mind as matter, when we know matter only through mind? If we had followed materialism thus far with clear ideas, when we reached its highest point, we would suddenly be seized with a fit of the inextinguishable laughter of the Olympians, as if waking from a dream. We would all at once become aware that its final result, knowledge, which it had reached so laboriously, was presupposed as the indispensable condition of its very starting point, mere matter. And when we imagined that we thought matter, we really thought only the subject that perceives matter, the eye that sees it, the hand that feels it, the understanding that knows it. Thus the tremendous pt2 principale reveals itself unexpectedly, for suddenly the last link is seen to be the starting point, the chain a circle, and the materialist is like Baron Munchausen, who, when swimming on horseback, drew the horse into the air with his legs and himself by the queue. The crude materialism, which even now, in the middle of the 19th century, has been served up again under the ignorant delusion that it is original, stupidly denies vital force, and first of all tries to explain the phenomena of life from physical and chemical forces, and these again from the mechanical effects of matter. But I will never believe that even the simplest chemical combination will ever admit of mechanical explanation, much less the properties of light, heat, and electricity. These will always require a dynamical explanation. No, it is impossible to solve the metaphysical puzzle, to discover the secret essence of reality, by examining matter first, and then proceeding to examine thought. We must begin with that which we know directly and intimately ourselves. We can never arrive at the real nature of things from without. However much we may investigate, we can never reach anything but images and names. We are like a man who goes round a castle seeking in vain for an entrance, and sometimes sketching the facades. Let us enter within. If we can ferret out the ultimate nature of our own minds, we shall perhaps have the key to the external world. Chapter 4. The World as Will. Part 1. The Will to Live. Almost without exception, philosophers have placed the essence of mind in thought and consciousness. Man was the knowing animal, the animal rationale. This ancient and universal radical error, this enormous proton pseudos, must before everything be set aside. Consciousness is the mere surface of our minds, of which, as of the earth, we do not know the inside, but only the crust. Under the conscious intellect is the conscious or unconscious will, a striving, persistent, vital force, a spontaneous activity, a well of imperious desire. The intellect may seem at times to lead the will, but only as a guide leads his master. The will is the strong blind man who carries on his shoulders the lame man who can see. We do not want a thing because we have found reason for it. We find reasons for it because we want it. We even elaborate philosophies and theories to cloak our desires. Hence, Schopenhauer calls man the metaphysical animal. Other animals desire without metaphysics. Nothing is more provoking. When we are arguing against a man with reasons and explanations, and taking all pains to convince him, then to discover at last that he will not understand that we have to do with his will. That didn't really make sense. Hence the uselessness of the logic. No one ever convinced anybody by logic, and even that doesn't make sense. Logicians use logic only as a source of income. To convince a man, you must appeal to his self-interest, his desires, his will. Observe how long we remember our victories and how soon we forget our defeats. Memory is the menial of will. In doing accounts, we make mistakes much oftener in our own favor than to our disadvantage, and this without the slightest dishonest intention. On the other hand, the understanding of the stupidest man becomes keen when objects are in question that closely concern his wishes. In general, the intellect is developed by danger, as in the fox, or by want, as in the criminal, but always it seems subordinate and instrumental to desire. When it attempts to displace the will, confusion follows. No one is more liable to mistakes than he who acts only on reflection. Consider the agitated strife of men for food, mates or children. Can this be the work of reflection? Certainly not. The cause is the half-conscious will to live, and to live fully. Men are only apparently drawn from in front. In reality they are pushed from behind. They think they are led on by what they see, when in truth they are driven on by what they feel, by instincts of whose operation they are half the time unconscious. Intellect is merely the minister of foreign affairs. Nature has produced it for the service of the individual will. Therefore it is only designed to know things so far as they afford motives for the will, but not to fathom them or to comprehend their true being. The will is the only permanent and unchangeable element in the mind. It is the will which, through continuity of purpose, gives unity to consciousness and holds together all its ideas and thoughts, accompanying them like a continuous harmony. It is the organ point of thought. Character lies in the will and not in the intellect. Character, too, is continuity of purpose and attitude, and these are will. Popular language is correct when it prefers the heart to the head. It knows, because it has not reasoned about it, that a good will is profounder and more reliable than a clear mind, and when it calls a man shrewd, knowing, or cunning, it implies its suspicion and dislike. Brilliant qualities of mind win admiration, but never affection, and all religions promise a reward for excellence of the will or heart. but none for excellence of the head or understanding. Even the body is the product of the will. The blood pushed on by that will, which we vaguely call life, builds its own vessels by wearing grooves in the body of the embryo. The grooves deepen and close up, and become arteries and veins. The will to know builds the brain, just as the will to grasp forms the hand, or as the will to eat develops the digestive tract. Indeed, these pairs, these forms of will and these forms of flesh, are but two sides of one process and reality. The relation is best seen in emotion, where the feelings and the internal body changes form one complex unit. The act of will and the movement of the body are not two different things, objectively known, which the bond of causality unites. They do not stand in a relation of cause and effect. They are one and the same, but they are given in entirely different ways, immediately and again in perception. The action of the body is nothing but the act of the will objectified. This is true of every movement of the body. The whole body is nothing but objectified will. The parts of the body must therefore completely correspond to the principal desires through which the will manifests itself. There must be the visible expression of these desires. Teeth, throat, and bowels are objectified hunger. The organs of generation are objectified sexual desire. The whole nervous system constitutes the antennae of the will, which it stretches within and without, as the human body generally corresponds to the human will generally. So the individual bodily structure corresponds to the individually modified will, the character of the individual. The intellect tires, the will never. The intellect needs sleep, but the will works even in sleep. Fatigue, like pain, has its seat in the brain. Muscles not connected with the cerebellum, like the heart, never tire. In sleep the brain feeds, but the will requires no food. Hence the need for sleep is greatest in brain workers. This fact, however, must not mislead us into extending sleep unduly, for then it loses its intensity and becomes mere loss of time. In sleep the life of man sinks to the vegetative level, and then the will works according to its original and essential nature, undisturbed from without, with no diminution of its power through the activity of the brain and the exertion of the knowing, which is the heaviest organic function. Therefore, in sleep, the whole power of the will is directed to the maintenance and improvement of the organism. Hence, all healing, all favorable crises take place in sleep. Burdock was right when he declared sleep to be the original state. The embryo sleeps almost continuously, and the infant most of the time. Life is a struggle against sleep. At first we win ground from it, which in the end it recovers. Sleep is a morsel of death borrowed to keep up and renew that part of life which has been exhausted by the day. That was an interesting statement. I'm going to read that again. Life is a struggle against sleep. At first we win ground from it, which in the end it recovers. Sleep is a morsel of death, borrowed to keep up and renew that part of life which has been exhausted by the day. I like that statement. It is our eternal foe. Even when we are awake, it possesses us partly. After all, what is to be expected of heads, even the wisest of which, is every night the scene of the strangest and the most senseless dreams, and which has to take up its meditations again on awakening from them. Will, then, is the essence of man. Now what if it is also the essence of life in all its forms, and even of intimate matter? What if will is the long sought for, the long despaired of thing in itself? the ultimate inner reality and secret essence of all things. Let us try then to interpret the external world in terms of will, and let us go at once to the bottom, where others have said that will is a form of force. Let us say that force is a form of will. To Hume's question, what is causality? We shall answer, will. As will is the universal cause in ourselves, so is it in things. And unless we so understand cause as will, causality will remain only a magic and mystic formula, really meaningless. Without this secret, we are driven to mere occult qualities like force or gravity or affinity. We do not know what these forces are, but we know, at least a little more clearly, what will is. Let us say, then, that repulsion and attraction, combination and decomposition, magnetism and electricity, gravity and crystallization are will. Goethe expressed this idea in the title of one of his novels, when he called the irresistible attraction of lovers that's a German word that has like 14 letters in it. I'm not going to attempt to pronounce it. I will spell it though. Die, D-I-E, is the first word. The second word is WHLVERWANDSCHAFTEN. Not even going to attempt it. Elective affinities. The force which draws the lover and the force which draws the planet are one. So in planet life, the lower we go among the forms of life, the smaller we find the role of intellect, but not so with will. That which in us pursues its ends by the light of knowledge, but here only strives blindly and dumbly in a one-sided and unchangeable manner, must yet in both cases come under the name of will. Unconsciousness is the original and natural condition of all things, and therefore also the basis from which, in particular species of beings, consciousness results as their highest effervescence. Wherefore, even then, unconsciousness always continues to predominate. Accordingly, most existences are without consciousness, but yet they act according to the laws of their nature, i.e., of their will. Plants have at most very weak analog of consciousness. The lowest species of animals only the dawn of it. But even after it has ascended through the whole series of animals to man and his reason, the unconsciousness of plants, from which it started, still remains the foundation, and may be traced in the necessity for sleep. Aristotle was right. There is a power within that molds every form in plants and planets, in animals and men. The instinct of animals in general gives us the best illustration of what remains of teleology in nature. For as instinct is an action similar to that which is guided by the conception of an end, and yet is entirely without this, so all construction in nature resembles that which is guided by the conception of an end, and yet is entirely without it. The marvelous mechanical skill of animals shows how prior will is to intellect. An elephant, which has been led through Europe and had crossed hundreds of bridges, refused to advance upon a weak bridge, though it had seen many horses and men crossing it. A young dog fears to jump down from the table. It foresees the effect of the fall, not by reasoning, for it has no experience of such a fall, but by instinct. Orangutans warm themselves by a fire which they find, but they do not feed the fire. Obviously, then, such actions are instinctive, and not the result of reasoning. They are the expression, not of intellect, but of will. The will, of course, is a will to live, and a will to maximum life. How dear life is to all living things, and with what silent patience it will bide its time. For thousands of years galvanism slumbered in copper and zinc, and they lay quietly beside silver, which must be consumed in flame as soon as all three are brought together under the required conditions. Even in the organic kingdom we see a dry seed preserve the slumbering force of life through 3,000 years, and, when at last the favorable circumstances occur, grow up as a plant. Corns of wheat found hermetically sealed in Egyptian tombs, and then sown in English gardens, have grown into plants 5 feet tall. Living toads found in limestone lead to the conclusion that even animal life is capable of suspension for thousands of years. The will is the will to live, and its eternal enemy is death. But perhaps it can defeat even death. And I think we'll stop there. That's the end of part 2 of a guide to Schopenhauer.